The rain fell like broken glass sharp, relentless, unforgiving. Ethan Cole stood motionless in front of the brownstone apartment he once called home. His suitcase leaning against his leg, rainwater streaming from his hair into his collar. The city pulsed behind him, taxis hissing through puddles. Neon signs bleeding red and blue against the wet pavement. From the open doorway came Clara's voice, sharp as shattered crystal. "I can replace you in 24 hours. For a second, everything stilled. Even the rain seemed to hesitate between drops. Ethan didn't move. His hand still rested on the handle of the suitcase. Knuckled pale, veins visible beneath the soaked skin. He could have said something, anything. But silence, heavy and final, settled between them. Clara's silhouette stood framed in the doorway. Perfect posture, arms crossed, her hair tied in that immaculate knot she always wore when angry. Behind her, the golden light of their apartment glowed like a cage of warmth he no longer belonged to. "Say something," she demanded, her voice trembling just enough to betray the rage beneath. Ethan raised his eyes, meeting hers. There was no hatred there, only exhaustion. The kind that grows in the space where love once lived. He finally spoke, voice low and calm, almost tender. "You already did." She blinked, as if the simplicity of his words cut deeper than any argument, but he didn't wait for her reply. He picked up his suitcase, turned, and walked into the rain. He walked without a destination through blocks lined with glowing windows, where laughter spilled from bars and couples huddled under umbrellas. The city was alive, indifferent to heartbreak. His reflection followed him in every puddle, blurred, distorted, unrecognizable. Ethan thought about how it all began, how he once photographed her against that same rain-soaked skyline, her laughter echoing as lightning flashed behind her. Back then, the rain was romantic. Now it was an elegy. He passed a billboard of a luxury brand featuring a woman who looked almost like Clara, poised, intouchable, perfect. She always wanted this world, he thought, and maybe I never fit inside it. When he reached the corner of 8th and Delancey, he stopped beneath a flickering streetlight. His phone buzzed a message from Clara. "Don't make this dramatic. Ethan, you chose this." He stared at the screen for a long time. The text, glowing coldly against the wet dark. Then he powered the phone off. No replies. No more explanations. He found shelter in a small diner, still open past midnight. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly as he slid into a booth, his clothes dripping onto the cracked vinyl seat. A waitress with tired eyes poured him coffee without asking. "You okay?" "On," she asked, glancing at him. He hesitated, then managed a half smile. "I think I just got replaced." She laughed. "I'm not sure if it was a joke. Happens more than you'd think." She walked away, leaving him alone with his coffee and reflection in the window, a ghost staring back through rain-streaked glass. Hours later, when the rain finally eased, he returned to his small studio on the Lower East Side, a clutter of canvases, old film cameras, and unfinished prints scattered across the floor. He sat in silence, dripping, breathing. The smell of chemicals and old paper filled the room. His eyes caught on a photo pinned to the wall, Clara, taken 2 years ago. She was sitting by the window, half turned toward him, sunlight spilling across her bare shoulder. She wasn't posing then. She was just herself. He remembered that morning how she had laughed when he told her she looked like a painting, how she'd thrown a pillow at him for saying it. There was tenderness in that memory, and for a moment, it almost made him forget the sound of her voice saying, "Replace." He took the photo down. His fingers lingered on the edges, tracing the faint creases. Then, quietly, he set it into a drawer and closed it. The city hummed outside his window, distant sirens, the hum of late trains, someone playing a saxophone down the street. It all sounded like the world moving on without him. Ethan sat on the floor, camera in hand. Through the lens, he stared at his reflection in the window. Tired eyes, unshaven face, heartbreak made human. He clicked the shutter. The flash illuminated the room for a second. freezing his emptiness in silver light. He looked at the camera's small screen. The photo wasn't beautiful. It wasn't even well composed. But it was honest. And maybe, he thought, that was a start. When dawn came, the city was washed clean, streets glistening, sky pale and bruised. Ethan packed what little he had and loaded his old Nikon bag. He scribbled a note on a torn piece of photo paper and left it on the table. Clara, you were right. You can replace me. But not everything you lose can be replaced. He didn't sign it. He didn't need to. As he stepped outside, the first sunlight broke through the clouds, striking his face not warm, but clear, like truth. He exhaled slowly, feeling something unfamiliar, not relief. But the quiet before it, the city moved around him again, uncaring. But for the first time in months, Ethan didn't care either. He walked toward the subway, disappearing into the hum of the morning crowd. A man erased. Yes, but perhaps also reborn. Before the rain, before the silence, there was laughter. The kind that filled small spaces and made them feel infinite. Ethan remembered that summer in Brooklyn when everything between them began. Clara Jensen was 26, then sharp, funny, impossibly alive. She wore red lipstick even on lazy Sundays and talked like every sentence was a plan to change the world. He met her at an art fair where he was selling black and white prints for $50 each. And she was the one person who didn't haggle. "I don't want the discount," she said, studying the photograph. "A storm breaking over Manhattan. I want the story." He smiled. "The story costs extra." She laughed, the kind of laugh that made strangers look over. That night, they walked along the East River, talking until dawn. Ethan told her about his dream of opening a small gallery. She told him about her ambition to work at a global firm. They both wanted to make something real in a city built on illusions. For years, they lived like co-conspirators. Their first apartment was a one-bedroom walk-up with thin walls and leaky pipes. But to them, it felt like a kingdom. Ethan would develop photos in the bathroom, while Clara drafted ad pitches on the kitchen floor. They celebrated every small victory, a sold print, a promotion, a rent check that didn't bounce. She'd model for him sometimes, not the polished corporate Clara the world would later know, but the barefoot woman wearing his old shirt, holding a cup of coffee, light brushing across her skin like devotion. He remembered her voice from those early mornings. "Promise me we won't become like them." Like who, he asked once. The people who forget what they wanted just because they got what they thought they needed. He'd kissed her then, believing her words were prophecy, but dreams don't always do sometimes. They evolve into something unrecognizable. As Clara's career began to rise, their lives shifted. First came the long nights at the office, then the designer clothes, the new apartment with white walls and glass furniture that reflected more than it absorbed. Her laughter became rarer, measured. Just for a few years, she'd say, pulling on her blazer. "Once I get the senior position, things will settle." Ethan nodded, but he saw how the light in her eyes changed. It wasn't excitement anymore. It was hunger. When she came home late, smelling like perfume in boardrooms, she'd scroll through her phone instead of asking about his day. The gallery he'd hoped to open never happened. Photography didn't pay enough. He picked up freelance work, weddings, fashion shoots, portraits. It was survival, not art. One evening, she came home from a networking gala, laughing. As she tossed her heels aside, Daniel Hayes was there, she said, pouring herself wine. "He runs the Hayes Group Real Estate, luxury brand partnerships. Brilliant guy. You'd like him." Ethan looked up from his laptop. "Would I?" She didn't notice the chill in his voice. He said, "I have potential, that I should think bigger." He smiled, but something inside him cracked. Their love began to turn transactional in quiet, invisible ways. Dinner conversations became performance reviews. Her compliments sounded like negotiations. "Maybe if you focused on more commercial work," she suggested one night, "we could finally afford a real place. Something with character." Ethan stared at her. This place has character. We built it. She sighed. Ethan, ambition isn't a crime. No, he said softly. But forgetting why you wanted something is. By their 5th anniversary, Clara was a rising star in her firm. The company had featured her in Forbes Women in Business. Ethan had taken the photo for the article, her standing in front of a glass window, the skyline behind her. It was beautiful, technically flawless. But when he looked at it, all he saw was distance. At the celebration dinner that night, surrounded by her colleagues, he realized he didn't belong in her world anymore. They spoke in acronyms and ambition. He spoke in light and shadow. When someone asked what he did, Clara answered before he could. Oh, Ethan. He's a photographer. Very creative, she said, smiling the kind of smile people wear when they're curating perception. That word creative sounded like pity dressed in politeness. Afterward, in the car, he said nothing. The city outside blurred into streaks of neon. Clara scrolled through her phone, her reflection flickering in the window like a stranger. Finally, she said, "Don't look at me like that." Like what? Like you're waiting for me to be the girl you married. Ethan turned away. Maybe I am. They stopped fighting not because they made peace, but because they gave up. Love became routine. Routine became silence. And silence became habit. Ethan filled it with work, small exhibitions, freelance gigs, hours in the darkroom. Clara filled it with status updates, conferences, and polished smiles. They were both busy pretending they hadn't already lost each other. Then came the evening that ended everything: the rain, the shouting, the suitcase by the door. But in truth, the ending had begun long before. It began in that first moment when Clara looked at him and saw not her lover, but her limitation. Months later, as Ethan sat in his studio remembering, he found one last photo. He had never developed a roll of film from their anniversary trip to Maine, back when things still felt fragile but hopeful. He turned it in his hands, wondering what moments were frozen inside. He almost threw it away. Then he stopped. Some things, he realized, deserved to stay undeveloped. Not forgotten, but left in the dark, where they can't hurt anyone anymore. He placed the roll gently in a small wooden box and closed it. Outside, the city kept shining bright, cold, and alive. It began with small things always. Small things first. A tag on social media, a photo from a company dinner, Clara standing beside men in tailored suits, champagne in hand, eyes glittering like she belonged to another world. Ethan would see them late at night, half awake, the glow of her phone lighting the bedroom ceiling. She'd scroll through comments, smiling at each one. He didn't have to ask who took the photos. He knew it wasn't him anymore. At first, he told himself not to care. They were just pictures. He thought, part of her job, but deep down, something began to shift. Not jealousy exactly, but recognition. He was watching the slow erasure of himself from her story. At dinner one night, in a rooftop restaurant overlooking the skyline, she sat across from him scrolling through emails while he tried to tell her about a photography commission. "They want to feature my work in a local art journal," he said, trying to sound casual. She didn't look up. "That's nice. What's the pay?" He hesitated. "It's not much, but it's exposure." Clara sighed, setting her phone down. "Ethan, exposure doesn't pay rent. You're too talented to keep chasing these side projects." "It's not a side project," he said quietly. "It's what I love." "Love doesn't build a future," she replied, her tone sharp but polished, the same tone she used in meetings. He felt the words land like cold metal between them. The waiter approached, pouring wine, and Ethan forced a smile as if nothing had happened. They ate in silence, surrounded by couples laughing, glasses clinking, the faint hum of expensive indifference. When they got home, she posted a picture from dinner, the city lights behind her, a perfect angle, a caption that read, "Work hard, shine harder." He wasn't in the photo. He wasn't even mentioned. Weeks blurred into months. Clara's name appeared more often in press releases and business panels. While Ethan's grew smaller on exhibition flyers, she began traveling for work. Los Angeles, Chicago, Miami, always coming back with stories about powerful people who understood ambition. One night, as she unpacked her luggage, Ethan noticed a man's business card on the dresser. Daniel Hayes, CEO, Hayes Group. The name lingered in his mind like a warning. New client, he asked, trying to keep his tone light. Clara zipped her bag closed. Something like that. There was a flicker in her eyes, a tiny, momentary hesitation she quickly buried under a smile. Don't be dramatic, she added. You know networking is part of my job. He nodded. But something about the way she said dramatic, dismissive, superior, stung more than jealousy ever could. At a dinner party a week later, Clara shined like a diamond under the low chandelier lights. She wore a black silk dress, hair perfectly pinned. Ethan stood beside her. The outsider, among her corporate friends, people who shook his hand politely, but never asked what he did after the introductions. During dessert, one of them, a man in his 40s with an expensive watch and a shallow laugh, asked, So, Ethan, are you still doing those artsy projects? Clara chuckled before he could answer. Oh, he's a creative spirit, she said, as though explaining a child's hobby. He just refuses to sell out. The table laughed softly, polite, restrained laughter. Ethan smiled back, but his chest felt hollow. Later, on the drive home, he asked, Was that necessary, what you? Making me sound like some starving artist joke. Clara exhaled, frustrated. Ethan, you take everything too personally. It was just conversation. Right, he said, just conversation. The rest of the drive was wordless, filled only with the hum of the tires and the sound of her notifications buzzing in the dark. By autumn, they were sleeping in separate rhythms. She'd come home past midnight, heels in her hand, makeup still perfect. He'd wake up as she slipped into bed, smelling of perfume and white wine. Once, half asleep, he whispered, Do you even like who we've become? She didn't answer. The next morning, he found a note on the counter, dinner with clients. Don't wait up. He stood there, holding the note like proof of something he hadn't wanted to believe. The breaking point came on a night, like any other, no thunder, no screaming, just quiet cruelty sharpened into words. They were in the living room. Clara had just come home from a gala, her phone lighting up with congratulatory messages. She was radiant, unstoppable, the version of herself the world adored. Ethan watched her, feeling more like an audience member than a husband. She noticed his stare. What, nothing, he said. Just wondering if there's any part of your life left that isn't staged. She turned slowly. You really want to do this now? Do what? Play the victim, she said. Because I'm not apologizing for wanting more than mediocrity. He took a step closer. You mean more than me? Her jaw tightened. Don't twist this. Ethan, you gave up on ambition. I didn't. He stared at her, the silence stretching, painful. Ambition didn't save you, Clara. It just made you forget what happiness looks like. She laughed, a short, bitter sound. Happiness. Don't kid yourself. You're just afraid of being left behind. Then came the words that burned everything to ash. She leaned forward, eyes cold, lips forming a smile that wasn't a smile at all. I can replace you in 24 hours. The world seemed to tilt. The words echoed in the space between them, louder than any shout. Ethan didn't respond. He couldn't. He just looked at her, not with anger, but with the realization that something sacred had finally died. She turned away first, already checking her phone, as if she hadn't just shattered him. That night, he packed his suitcase. Slowly, carefully, every sound, the zipper, the click of the lock, the creak of the door felt like punctuation in a story that no longer needed words. When he stepped outside, rain began to fall thin. Steady, familiar. Behind him, Clara's voice rose once more, distant but cruelly clear. I can replace you in 24 hours. This time, he didn't look back. Winter came early that year. Snow pressed against the city windows, like a memory refusing to fade. It had been 4 months since Ethan Cole last heard Clara's voice. 4 months since the rain, the door, the silence. He hadn't gone back for anything, not for his clothes, not for closure. He left everything behind except his cameras and a small leather notebook where he now wrote thoughts instead of love letters. His days had become quiet, stripped of noise, but not peace. He rented a modest loft above a bookstore on Orchard Street, its walls smelling faintly of ink and dust. It was there, surrounded by emptiness, that he began to rebuild himself. Every morning, Ethan walked through the city with his Nikon hanging from his neck, photographing strangers, people the world never looked at twice. A man feeding pigeons on a park bench, a woman crying in a laundromat, a teenager staring at his reflection in a subway window. Loneliness became his subject, but unlike before, it didn't scare him. It was honest, unfiltered. He called the project People You Pass. When a local gallery owner saw the photos, she offered to display them. Ethan declined at first, afraid that turning his pain into art would cheapen it, but she insisted, and so he agreed. The exhibit was small but intimate, and to everyone's surprise, it caught attention. Visitors described his work as haunting, intimate, too honest to look away. For the first time, Ethan wasn't defined by Clara or by what he'd lost. He was simply seen. At night, he would walk home through the cold streets, sometimes passing the same restaurants they once loved. Through fogged windows, he'd catch glimpses of couples' hands intertwined, laughter, echoing. He no longer felt bitterness watching them, only a distant tenderness, like a man remembering a song from another life. Still, there were moments when her name appeared in unexpected places. An article headline, a billboard, a social media post shared by someone he still followed. Clara Jensen, VP of Marketing at Hayes Group. The photos were immaculate. Clara smiling beside Daniel Hayes, her hand on his arm, both dressed in black tie perfection. They looked powerful, effortless, beautiful. But to Ethan, there was something hollow in those images, something that reminded him of his own photographs. Except hers lacked soul. He remembered how she once said, "I want a life that looks good from the outside." Now she had it. One night, unable to sleep, he clicked open his old external drive. Years of photographs, thousands of frames. He scrolled through folders labeled Clara, Maine, 2019. Our first apartment, untitled. He stopped on one image he'd never printed Clara in their old kitchen, laughing as she poured wine into 2 mismatched mugs because all the glasses were dirty, her hair messy, wearing his t-shirt, eyes bright. He zoomed in, and the pixels fractured her face into fragments. Still, it was the most alive version of her he'd ever captured. He whispered to the empty room, "You were enough back then. You just stopped believing it." Then he closed the folder and never opened it again. Weeks later, Ethan received an invitation to exhibit at a downtown art fair. This time, he accepted. He spent nights curating his pieces, portraits of strangers, but each carrying traces of his own grief. He titled the collection The Anatomy of Absence. The opening night drew a small crowd. The air smelled of wine and varnish. The lights cast soft halos on the photographs. Ethan watched people move between the frames, posing, staring, feeling something he couldn't put into words. A woman approached him, middle-aged, elegant, with tired eyes. "These," she said, pointing to the portraits. "They're about loss, aren't they?" Ethan nodded. "Loss and what comes after." She smiled faintly. "What comes after peace?" He said, "If you let it." Across town that same night, Clara attended a gala with Daniel Hayes, a glittering event at the plaza. Chandeliers, reflecting off champagne glasses. Cameras flashed, She wore a diamond necklace he'd given her that morning. Daniel leaned in and whispered, "You're the face of success tonight." She smiled automatically, her practiced expression flawless. But when she looked into the mirrored walls of the ballroom, she barely recognized the woman looking back all surface. No center. During a toast, Daniel spoke about vision and drive. He introduced Clara as his greatest partnership, the crowd applauding. She smiled again, but her mind drifted elsewhere to an image she couldn't shake: Ethan, standing in the rain, silent. For the first time, she wondered what silence had cost him and what noise had cost her. A month later, Clara found herself scrolling through an online article about a local photographer whose exhibit had gone viral for its raw honesty. The headline read, "The Man Who Captures the Beauty of Being Alone, Ethan Cole." She froze. The thumbnail image showed one of his portraits, a young woman sitting in a subway car, light falling across her face, like confession. The caption beneath read, "The moment before someone decides to let go." Her chest tightened. She clicked the article, reading every word. There was a photo of Ethan at the exhibit, smiling faintly, camera in hand, looking healthier, calmer, as if he had finally escaped her gravity. She whispered to herself, "You did it." But she wasn't sure if it was pride or regret. Daniel's voice interrupted her thoughts. "You ready? Car's waiting?" She closed the article, locking her phone, and smiled that perfect public smile again. But inside, something had begun to crack, not loudly, not all at once, just enough for light to seep through. Back in his studio that night, Ethan stood before a blank canvas of photographs spread across the floor. The city hummed beneath his window, alive and endless. He lifted his camera and pointed it toward the glass, the reflection of himself staring back, layered over the skyline. For once, the image didn't feel lonely. It felt complete. He clicked the shutter. The flash lit the room white. And just like that, his pain became beauty. The ballroom glittered like a crown of glass. Soft jazz played beneath the murmur of champagne laughter. And every face in the room turned toward Clara Jensen, the woman of the hour, newly engaged to Daniel Hayes, heir to the Hayes Group empire. Photographers hovered near the marble staircase, flashes bursting like fireworks. As Clara descended in a silver gown that shimmered with every step, she smiled, flawless, deliberate, perfect. Daniel wrapped an arm around her waist. "You're trending already," he whispered, glancing at his phone. "Number, power couple." She laughed. That signature practice sound light, charming, empty. But as the night unfolded, beneath the glitter and applause, Clara felt the faint tremor of something wrong, a tension in the air she couldn't name. Hours later, as speeches ended and music swelled, the ballroom lights dimmed. A voice from the stage announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, before we close the evening, we have something special. A video that's taking social media by storm tonight. A preview from New York's most talked about new artist, Ethan Cole." Clara froze. The name hit her chest like ice. The giant LED screen behind the stage flickered to life. The room hushed. The first image appeared, a photograph of Clara, taken months before their separation. She was sitting at a cafe window, her reflection layered over the street behind her. In her eyes was something raw, unguarded, the first cracks of discontent, then another. Clara standing before a vanity, makeup half applied, expression distant. Then another, smiling at a dinner table beside Daniel Hayes. But her reflection in the wineglass looked tired, almost pleading. Each frame bled into the next. The sequence was hauntingly beautiful, underscored by a soft piano melody. The final image bore the title in white letters, "The Woman Who Vanished Behind Mirrors." Then a quote appeared on screen. "Sometimes we lose ourselves chasing reflections of what we think love should look like." Ethan Cole. The room fell silent. Clara's throat tightened. She could hear the whispers. "Is that her? Oh my God. It's Clara Hayes. Wait, wasn't she married to him?" Daniel turned toward her, his jaw stiff. "What is this?" "Clara, I don't know." she stammered. Her pulse pounded in her ears. He looked at the screen again, where her face lingered in soft grayscale. Beautiful. Yes, but hollow, fading between frames like a ghost. Daniel's hand slipped from her waist. Cameras began to flash again. Not for celebration this time, but scandal. Within hours, the video spread everywhere. The woman who vanished behind mirrors, trended across social media. Art critics called it a masterpiece of emotional exposure. Tabloids called it revenge disguised as art. Every frame told the story of a woman consumed by her own reflection, a metaphor. Some said, for modern vanity or toxic love. But those who knew Ethan and Clara saw something deeper. It wasn't hate. It was grief, beautifully weaponized. The following morning, Clara sat alone in Daniel's penthouse. He hadn't come home. Her phone was a battlefield of missed calls and messages from colleagues, journalists, friends, all wanting a statement. She opened one of the circulating clips, her face, frozen mid-laugh, reflected in a mirror, eyes empty. She remembered that night vividly. She'd been getting ready for a gala. Ethan sitting behind her on the couch, quietly photographing light patterns through the blinds. She hadn't realized she'd become the subject. She whispered, "You were watching me disappear." And he had captured every moment of it. Later that day, she finally reached his gallery online. The Cole Collective, a minimalist site filled with quiet, melancholic imagery. The featured exhibition was indeed The Woman Who Vanished Behind Mirrors. In the artist's note, Ethan wrote, "This collection isn't about blame. It's about how we vanish piece by piece when we start performing life instead of living it." There was no mention of her name, no accusation, just truth, gentle, but merciless. That evening, Daniel returned, his expression cold. "So this is who you are," he said. "The woman in the mirrors?" "Daniel, it's not. You told me you were over him. You lied." "It's not about him," she said, her voice breaking. "It's about me." "Exactly," he said, turning toward the door. "It's always about you." The door slammed, echoing like a verdict. Alone again, Clara walked to the mirror above the fireplace. For years, she'd built her life around that reflection. Perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect lies. But now, looking into her own eyes, she saw it. The emptiness Ethan had captured. The version of herself that had vanished behind the glass long before he ever left. She pressed a hand to the mirror. It felt cold, real. And for the first time, Clara Jensen, the woman everyone admired, began to cry. Across town, Ethan stood outside the same gallery where his exhibit premiered. The street was crowded, the windows glowing with his photographs. People lingered, staring, whispering. A reporter asked him, "Do you regret showing her face?" Ethan paused, the city lights flickering in his eyes. "No," he said quietly, "because it's not her face. It's the reflection we all chase when we forget who we are." He turned away before the cameras could flash. That night, the world talked about Ethan Cole, the artist who turned heartbreak into truth. But somewhere between the headlines and hashtags, the story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about a man who found peace in honesty, and a woman who finally saw herself not in the mirror, but in what she'd lost. Morning light spilled through the fog like diluted gold, washing over a city that didn't care about yesterday's headlines. But for Clara Jensen, every whisper of wind sounded like her name. Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Another article, another think piece, another fall from grace. From icon to illusion. The woman behind Ethan Cole's masterpiece. Vanity Unveiled, the real story of the woman who vanished behind mirrors. Her PR team stopped answering. Daniel had moved out. Her modeling contracts were under review. In 48 hours, the empire she built on image collapsed, not with fire or scandal, but with truth. By afternoon, she found herself walking aimlessly through downtown Manhattan, a scarf pulled high over her face, The streets buzzed with people rushing toward meaning or away from it. Clara wasn't sure which direction she was headed. Then she saw it across the street, glowing, like a confession in glass and steel. The Cole Collective new exhibition. Now, showing. Her breath caught. For a moment, she almost turned away. But something deeper, shame, longing, maybe love, drew her across the street. Inside, the gallery was silent, almost reverent. Muted jazz played faintly in the background. The scent of rain and white lilies hung in the air. Crowds moved slowly. Voices hushed, as if in church. And there she was everywhere. Not in name, but in form, in expression. In the haunting way, her reflection blurred with the city behind her. One photo showed her staring into a vanity mirror, light carving loneliness across her cheekbones. Another, her silhouette framed by window blinds, her smile fractured by the glass. Another, her back turned, walking away from a shadow that almost looked like Ethan's. Each frame whispered, "You were seen." Clara's throat tightened. Her heels echoed against the polished floor as she walked deeper into the exhibit. People around her murmured, praising the art, the emotion, the tragic beauty of it all. He captured something raw. A woman said, "Like she's there but already gone." "It's haunting." Another replied, "You can feel her emptiness." Clara wanted to scream, "That's me." But the words died before they reached her lips. Because no one would believe her, and maybe she didn't deserve to be believed. She reached the final piece, the largest, set apart from the others. A full-body portrait in monochrome, Clara, reflected in a cracked mirror. Eyes wide, almost childlike, as if realizing too late that the mirror wasn't reflecting anymore. It was absorbing. Below it, a small plaque read, "When love becomes performance, even truth starts to act." Her vision blurred. She pressed a hand to her chest, struggling to breathe. "Beautiful, isn't it?" A soft voice spoke behind her. She turned. An older woman, silver-haired and serene, stood, studying the same photograph. "It's like she's mourning herself," the woman said. "You can almost feel her regret." Clara managed to whisper, "Maybe she deserves to." The woman smiled gently, unaware. "Don't we all?" There, Clara nodded, tears rising. "Yes, we all do." When the woman walked away, Clara stood alone before her own ghost. Hours passed, unnoticed. She sat on a bench near the back of the gallery, watching strangers pass through her life in pictures. Their admiration was her punishment, every compliment, another reminder that her pain had become his beauty. And yet, part of her felt proud. Proud that Ethan had seen through her facade. Proud that he had turned what was broken into something that meant something. That night, as the crowd thinned, Clara lingered near the exit. She turned back one last time to the wall of mirrors that once reflected her false perfection. Now, they reflected truth. Her truth. And in that moment, she didn't hate him anymore. Outside, rain had begun again, soft, steady, forgiving. She walked through it without an umbrella. Makeup dissolving, hair undone. A cab slowed beside her. "Miss, you need a ride." She shook her head. "No, thank you." For the first time, Clara Jensen, the woman who had built a life on control, didn't care how the world saw her. She let the rain wash the last of the makeup from her face. It didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt like beginning. That night, Ethan closed the gallery alone. He stood in the quiet, turning off lights one by one until only her final portrait remained illuminated. He looked at it for a long time, not with pride, not with anger, with something closer to peace. She finally came. A voice said behind him, "The gallery manager." Ethan didn't turn. "I know. You saw her?" He nodded. She stood right there, in front of herself. The manager hesitated. "Do you think she understood?" Ethan smiled faintly. "She always understood, just too late." He turned off the final light, and the room fell into darkness. Outside, Across the city, Clara stood before her apartment building the same door she'd once slammed in his face, shouting she could replace him in 24 hours. She reached for the handle, paused, and whispered into the rain. "You were right, Ethan. I disappeared long before you left." Then she walked inside not to hide, but to start again. The city was quieter than usual that evening, the kind of quiet that follows a storm, when even the wind seems hesitant to disturb what's left behind. Clara Jensen walked through the dim streets of Soho, her coat pulled tight, a paper cup of coffee going cold in her hands. She'd spent the week in silence. No interviews, no statements. Just reflection and regret that didn't sting anymore, only ached. She didn't know why her steps led her here to Pier 47, where she and Ethan used to walk after his late-night shoots, the same place they once planned their future, back when dreams were still theirs, to share. Now, she just wanted to feel the air he used to breathe. The pier was empty except for one figure at the railing, camera slung over his shoulder. Ethan Cole. He didn't turn when she approached. The sunset burned against the water, orange bleeding into steel blue, the same palette he used to love capturing. Clara stopped a few feet behind him. Her voice was small, almost lost in the wind. "Ethan." He turned then, slowly. Their eyes met for the first time in over a year. No fury, no tremor of pride, just two ghosts recognizing each other. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said quietly. "I almost didn't." She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But then I remembered, this was where we said we'd always come back if we ever got lost." Ethan's expression softened. "I remember." They stood in silence. The water lapped gently against the pier, carrying away the words they didn't say. Finally, she broke it. "Was this your revenge?" Her voice cracked halfway through, the words trembling with both accusation and longing. Ethan turned his gaze toward the horizon. "No," he said after a long pause. "It was my goodbye." Clara swallowed hard. "You humiliated me. I showed the truth," he said simply, and maybe that's what hurt the most. She looked down, her reflection trembling in the dark water below. "You made the world see what I didn't want to see. I didn't do it to punish you, Clara," he said gently. "I did it to understand why we stopped being real." Her breath hitched. "And did you?" He nodded. "Yes. We stopped being real the moment we started performing." She laughed quietly, bitterly. "You always said I loved the camera more than I loved you." Ethan's eyes met hers. "No, Clara. You loved the version of yourself the camera gave you. I just didn't fit in the frame anymore." The honesty in his voice cut deeper than anger ever could. She stepped closer, her eyes wet. "You could have destroyed me completely, Ethan." "You didn't." "I didn't want to," he said. "I just wanted to let go in the only way I know how." Clara nodded slowly. "By turning pain into art," he gave a half smile. "It's the only thing that ever made sense to me." A long silence followed. The city behind them flickered to life, buildings lighting up, one by one. Reflections rippling across the Hudson. Clara stared at him, memorizing the lines of his face. Older now. Calmer. Untouchable. In a way that came from healing. "I saw your new portraits," she said softly. "They're different. So am I." "Are you happy?" He considered that for a long moment. "I'm free." Clara exhaled, almost relieved. "Then I guess I did something right." Ethan turned to her, eyes full of that familiar gentleness that had once undone her. "You did. You made me see what love becomes when it stops being honest." Her lip trembled. "And me?" He studied her for a moment before answering. "You're still finding yourself. That's not punishment. It's grace." Clara blinked back tears. "I thought grace was forgiveness." "It is," he said, "and you're giving it to yourself right now." For a while, they simply stood side by side, watching the river move. The world had stopped demanding apologies. There was only the rhythm of water and the sound of two hearts learning to beat differently. "I miss us sometimes," she whispered. Ethan smiled faintly. I do too, but missing isn't the same as wanting back. She looked at him, really looked the man she had once tried to shape, now standing whole in his own silence. Do you ever think we could have saved it? He shook his head gently. No, because we were both too busy saving our pride. Clara nodded, a tear tracing down her cheek. You're right. The wind picked up, brushing her hair across her face. Ethan reached out instinctively, tucking a strand behind her ear. A small, a familiar gesture. For a second, time folded. The rain, the shouting, the mirrors, the pain all dissolved into that touch. Then he stepped back. Goodbye, Clara. Her voice broke as she whispered. You already said goodbye. Ethan's eyes softened. Then this is yours. He turned and walked down the pier, his figure fading into the amber haze of dusk. Clara watched him go, not chasing, not pleading, just watching, because for the first time, she understood sometimes love ends not in betrayal or bitterness, but in acceptance. She whispered into the evening air, Thank you for seeing me. The wind carried her words away, scattering them across the water like ashes in absolution. Later that night, as Ethan developed a roll of new film in his studio, he found her reflection. Again, faint, accidental, caught in the corner of one frame. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't hollow anymore. Either. He held the photo up to the light. For a moment, he almost smiled back. Some goodbyes aren't endings. They're the moment we finally tell the truth. Snow began to fall that night. The first of the season. The city wore it like forgiveness. Softening edges. Dimming noise. The streets glowed under lamplight, alive with strangers moving toward warmth. Ethan Cole walked among them, hands buried in his coat pockets, camera strap brushing his shoulder. He didn't look back. Not because he didn't care anymore, but because he finally could move forward without the weight of memory dragging behind him. Every breath of cold air felt clean. Every sound, car horns, footsteps, distant laughter felt new again. He crossed Fifth Avenue just as the light turned red, the world pausing for a heartbeat. Then he disappeared into the rhythm of the city he'd once feared would forget him. Across town, inside the gallery that had become both confessional and graveyard, Clara Jensen stood alone. The last visitor had left an hour ago. The lights had dimmed to their soft evening glow. Only one exhibit remained illuminated, the woman who vanished behind mirrors. She stared at her own reflection, or rather, the version of her Ethan had captured. Gone was the vanity, the practiced angles, the carefully rehearsed smile. What stared back at her now was something raw, vulnerable, human. For so long, she had chased perfection, the perfect face, the perfect life, the perfect love. But perfection had been her prison. Now, under the dim light of her own undoing, she finally saw the truth. She hadn't lost Ethan. She'd lost herself, piece by piece. Every time she chose appearance over honesty, her heels clicked softly on the marble floor as she walked closer to the portrait, so close she could see the brushstrokes of light on her photographed skin. Her fingertips hovered over the glass. For the first time, she didn't see shame. She saw a story, one worth mourning, one worth forgiving. Tears welled, unguarded, unashamed. They fell silently, streaking down her cheeks like rain on glass. She didn't cry for losing him. She cried for the years she spent, pretending she wasn't lost. Outside, the snow thickened, blanketing the sidewalks, muting the world. Through the gallery windows, her silhouette stood motionless, framed by her own reflection, the woman she was, and the one she was becoming. Across the river, Ethan sat in a small diner, the kind open, past midnight, filled with the hum of coffee machines and old jazz on a crackling speaker. He placed his camera on the counter, ordered black coffee, and watched the snow gather against the glass. He should have felt triumphant. The exhibit had sold out. Critics called it transcendent. His name finally carried weight. But that wasn't what filled him. It was something quieter. Peace. The kind that comes when a wound stops asking to be remembered. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope, the last undeveloped film roll he'd kept from their time together. He turned it between his fingers, then smiled faintly and slid it back into his pocket. Some memories, he thought, are better left in the dark. In the gallery, Clara finally turned away from the portrait. She walked slowly down the hall, her footsteps echoing softly. Near the exit, she noticed something she hadn't seen before, a single photograph tucked in a quiet corner. It wasn't part of the main exhibit. It showed her and Ethan together, from behind, sitting on a bench near the pier, their shoulders touching. The city, a blur behind them. It wasn't signed, just a small handwritten note beneath it. What remains after goodbye is who we really are. She traced the words with her finger, her heart swelling with something like grace. He hadn't meant to destroy her. He'd meant to free her and himself. She stepped out into the night. The snow kissed her face, melting against her skin. Her reflection followed her in the darkened glass of shop windows. Softer now, unpainted, real. Her phone buzzed a text from an unknown number. She opened it. It was a single photograph. The pier at dusk. Empty. The water glowing gold beneath the fading sun. No caption, but she didn't need one. Ethan's goodbye had already said everything. She stood there for a long time, letting the city breathe around her. Then she whispered, not to him, but to herself, I'm still here. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. In his studio, Ethan poured another cup of coffee and opened the window. The cold air rushed in, brushing against the dried photographs, hanging to develop faces of strangers. Ordinary, imperfect, real. He looked at them and smiled. The camera clicked once more, the start of a new collection. No titles, no revenge, no ghosts, just people seen as they were. Outside, the snow kept falling, and somewhere between the gallery and the river, between her tears and his silence, the last remnants of their love dissolved not into bitterness, but into truth. Because in the end, Ethan and Clara didn't destroy each other. They revealed each other. And sometimes, that's the closest thing to love that remains.